In order to do the boost gauge install, you'll need the following supplies. You'll need the boost gauge, the housing, with miscellaneous clamps. You'll need the boost port adapter and some pressure tubing. You also need a T-tap for the positive power on the boost gauge lighting, and then you'll need an 8mm socket, a flathead screwdriver, and I think they're T20 and T25 Torx. The first thing you need to do is remove the intake, so I've already done this. There's 4 screws right here. There's this clip right here. There's a clamp right here that you use a flathead screwdriver. And unscrew all these and wiggle this, pull this out. Then the next step, there's another screw right here. And then once you have that loose, you'll wiggle this off and you'll be able to access the mass airflow sensor. So with that, you'll use the 8mm socket and then you'll loosen this up. Once this is loose, you can wiggle the mass airflow sensor off, set it to the side. Then you'll take your new boost port adapter. You can lubricate this O-ring if you want to make it go in smoother. Put that in place, use the existing screw. Screw that back into place. It's on there pretty tight. Then you'll put this back in. Use the new bolt that it came with. And this one is a 5/32 Allen key. So that's on there pretty tight. I loosely put everything back together just in case it throws a cell light. Before I tighten everything up, I want to make sure that it actually works. So I'm in neutral right now. I'm going to start the car. And it does. In order to get past the firewall, I needed to remove this trim piece. So in order to do that, there was a cap on top of the windshield wiper. You pry that off. And then there was a screw or a bolt that was held on by a 13mm socket, so I took that off. Then the hard part was actually wiggling this out. I had to use some PV blaster penetration, like catalyst or oil, to loosen that up, and then you just kind of wiggle it out, and then eventually it pops out. So once that was out, I did that on both sides, and I got those out. There's a 10mm socket held here, and there's one behind right there, and once you get those out, this piece comes right out. And then moving on to here, there's an octopus looking cap. So you take your flathead screwdriver, you pry this black cap out. Do that on both of these two sides, and then eventually you're able to wiggle or pull the one down there off. And once you have that off, there's actually 2 extra slots. There's one, this one, the smaller one, it looked like this before. I actually cut it, and you can see some light coming through that actually goes through the firewall underneath inside the car. So I'm going to route the housing through that, and I'll show you what it looks like on the other side. Now we're inside the car. There was a trim piece right here. I took it off. It was held by three screws. There's one down here, here, and here. I think that was the T20 or T25. I don't know if it's necessary, but it's just easier to work with. If you go down here, let's see. I don't know if you can see it, but there's light coming through one of those holes, and that's where I'm going to route the pressure tubing. I'll probably start on the outside and put it in through here. black tube here is just what came out. So we're gonna pull this through and then figure out how to route it to the pressure gauge. I want to show you how I decided to route it. So the cable runs here. I'm using the one that it came with, and then I zip tied it to the one that came with the other boost gauge. So it's tying in from there to there, between this rubber piece, all the way around and in there. There were 2 screws holding this gauge in place. They're right there and there. Once you have that off, you can pull this entire tachometer gauge console off and pry this out. So what I decided to do was drill 2 holes. As you can see, there's 2 right there, and that's going to hold the boost gauge. And after doing that, I noticed that I covered one of the screw holes, so I might just leave that off. One thing I want to mention was that on the R53 there was a dedicated wire that would light up when you turned on your lights. For some reason I can't seem to figure that out. I tried turning the lights on and there were 2 wires, the one on the far right and also the red and yellow wire that were on, but when I turned the light off they're also on, so I think they're constantly on. In terms of the lighting, I want this light to turn on whenever I turn the lights on. So I read online that there's a switch light source that ties into this DSC unit. For those of you who are wondering how do I get in here, there's 2 screws that hold this in place. Once I unscrewed this entire center console piece was able to move, but there's also one in the back that I had to remove. Once I unscrewed that, I pulled that off, and then I was able to lift this a little higher just to give myself more space to work with. So if you look here, there's a gray and red wire. I T-tapped into that and fed my wiring through here, back into here. I'm going to solder that on and heat shrink tube it just to clean that up. Right now this negative is grounded to the steering column. I need to figure out where to mount that to make it more permanent, but let's see if it works. So right now the light is off. If I turn the light on, you can see that the light is on, then this light is also on. So if I turn it off, it is off. Right now I'll just solder everything and clean it up and put this back together. Here's the final setup. I ended up grounding the wire to the steering column screw. It's not the best, but it'll do for now. Here's the pressure tubing that goes through the firewall, ground, and then the positive wire routes through here and into this. So that's pretty much it.